welcome to episode 10 of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast. Your new safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and religion. We will take it all very, very seriously, but not too seriously. Now, something that no one has clamored for, but you're going to get anyway.
Act 1, two idiots discuss sports again.
Welcoming back to the show, my friend Brian, to discuss all things sports. Brian, how are you?
Fantastic, Patrick. How are you this evening, sir?
I'm doing well. You know, I appreciate the fact that you're coming back on the show, and I know that you're excited to talk about the highly effective, well-employed replay system utilized by Major League Baseball. You said, I'm dying to come on and congratulate all of the principals in Major League Baseball for what a success the replay system has been thus far in the 2021 season. Please, take the stage.
Congratulate may be a bit of an overstatement per se. Let's be honest, the entire thing is a crapshoot. It's a mess, it's a disaster, and it needs to go away. And go away immediately, or be fixed in one way, shape, or form. The challenge that I see with it is if you're going to have replay, and the actual replay shows the fact that the call was wrong, you must overturn said call. You cannot keep same call. You must overturn said call. It cannot stand. It cannot be confirmed. It must be overturned. And this, my friend, is the challenge that we're having in the 2021 season.
What's interesting about Major League Baseball and this replay system is, and just based off what you said, it's not clear that any of the umpires or anyone who's involved in the replay system understands that they're utilizing it in order to potentially overturn a call. Based on what we see with our eyes, and then based on the calls that they make after watching the replay, it's as if no one explained to them, you know, if what you see on the replay isn't consistent with what you called on the field, you can change it.
Absolutely. And not only can you change it, if what you see on the replay is actually reality, you must change it. This is not a situation of we don't know what a catch or a football move is. This is the fact that you must touch a white base with your foot, your hand, or your bodily parts in order to be called safe before someone tags you out. If you don't do that, you're out.
I think that's the most disconcerting, right? The most disconcerting thing about this replay is that we see players not on bag, ball in glove of other opposing player, touching the player not on bag, and they call them safe, right? Or
absolutely.
Vice versa, someone is clearly out. Someone has clearly been tagged prior to or after touching the bag, but then they overshot the bag and they were tagged.
Correct.
And these calls aren't being made. So, yes, the whole thing, you use the word crapshoot. I would go as far to say that it's just bullshit. You can't trust one way or the other when it goes to replay what's going to happen no matter what you see.
Oh, you can't, and that's the absolute truth with it. I mean, Alec Bohm with the Philadelphia Phillies over the past week and a half still hasn't touched home plate. I don't even know what to say when on a nationally televised game at 5 different angles, everybody in the ballpark sees it, everybody on television sees it, every announcer sees it. Even Alex Rodriguez, as dreadful as he is, still sees it. The foot hits short of the base. The cleat sticks into dirt. The foot hops up over base and lands on other side of base. He still has not touched home plate. Now, we then go to your New York Metropolitans in the fact that on a bases loaded 1-2 count where there is a strike being thrown, Mr. Conforto decides to lean his elbow in with an elbow pad the size of Kansas. Has baseball, that would be a strike, hit him in the elbow. It's called a hit by pitch, goes to first base, and scores the winning run. The number of things wrong with that specific play are unbelievable.
All right, so
Absolutely
I'm going to take
unbelievable.
exception to this. This is the Barry
I know.
Bonds corollary, right? Barry Bonds introduced the fact that you can wear basically body armor into a baseball game because you're so valuable to ameliorate all of the violence that getting hit by a baseball would cause, and it's just allowed numerous players to lean into pitches without fear of being hit by that pitch, knowing full well that they are challenging the umpire to make a call, right? It's the easy call is baseball hit me. I go to first base. That's the easy call. The challenging call is I leaned into that pitch in order to be hit. How often do you ever see an umpire? Now, Grant, I'm not making this argument to defend the Mets. I'll defend the Mets when they deserve it, which means that I'm routinely never defending the Mets. I'm just making the point that these guys are allowed to wear this crap, which I don't like. They're allowed to go up there and put the umpire in a compromising position because the umpire has to say, I think you leaned in, right? How often do you ever see an umpire make the call, you leaned in to take that pitch?
I don't care if you're dressed like a stormtrooper. You could go up in full white garb. You could
The
be
regalia, the Star Wars regalia.
Full regalia. I don't care. You could be in full knight regalia with your chainmail on, standing at the knights that say knee, and it doesn't matter what you're wearing. If ball thrown by pitcher is between the shoulders and the knees, between the left and the right side of the home plate, it's a strike. It doesn't matter if you lean into it. Now, if he leans into it and the ball is off the plate, then we've got the Barry Bonds rule. But that's not the case here. The rule is clear. If a ball is going to be a strike, it doesn't matter if he is hit by the pitch. You cannot lean into a strike and be called with a hit by pitch. You are out. It is a strike, sir. I don't care that it hits you on your body armor, on your stormtrooper helmet. It doesn't matter. It's a strike, and you are out, and you must go back to your dugout.
I want to talk about a broader issue, and I'm wondering how you feel about this. We see the implementation of replay in baseball. So far, it's been a disaster. They used replay in football in both college and the pros with mixed results. I think the only league, in my mind, North American league, that's done it well is the NHL. But, I'm a fan of the international game, soccer, football, and the Premier League has completely butchered replay with its use of VAR. Again, very similar to baseball. You have no idea what the hell's going to happen based on the things that you see with your two eyes and the way they interpret the rules. Fans have been clamoring this for a long time. We need to use replay. We need to get everything right. But it appears if the leagues are doing this as a fuck you to the fans. In other words, yeah, we're rolling it out. We'll implement it. But you know what? There's going to be no rhyme or reason to it. You're not going to get any more clarity. Now, I'm not saying that this is a conspiracy theory. I just don't think they care. I think that they're only doing it to placate fans, to try to maintain some of the fleeting fan base that they have. And they really don't care whether it's done well, whether it actually results in a just outcome. They just want you to shut up and keep spending money. Your thoughts?
Well, I think that they're trying to convince us that they're doing the right thing. And as you so aproposly said a few weeks ago, all you've convinced us of is that you're an asshole.
Right.
If you're going to have it, by all means, I get it, right? The fans have clamored for it. It's what needs to be done. We've got the technology. But get somebody in their right mind to actually make these damn calls right. That's the problem, right? And whether it's the argument then gets into whether it's a football move, is it an actual catch? There are some pretty cut and dry factors with this, right? specifically in baseball, right? It's a pretty simple process. If you're not going to get it right, then just get rid of it. I was looking at some numbers earlier today. Last year in a 60-game season, there were 526 reviews and 898 games. Now, that's in a 60-game season. If you extrapolate that out, each individual team in a normal season would be involved in 95 different replays. Of those, 42% were overturned and 34% stood. They weren't confirmed, they weren't overturned, they just stood. And while that number seems to be pretty simple and pretty easy to think about, there's the placation that seems to happen. And the arguments can be made, and the conspiracy theorists can come out that, New York doesn't want to overturn their brethren on the field. They don't want to make them look bad. For years, they've made their calls without replay. They've made them pretty well. And if that's the case, let's just go back to that, right? Let's take the controversy out of it. Just go back to the fact that there will be human error in some way, shape, or form. Is that not one of the joys of sports overall? Does it absolutely have to be perfect, right? Because you are not going to please everyone. But when you look at the egregious mistakes that have been made, something has to be changed. If you're going to continue to use it, something has to be changed. Whether it's the umps that are in New York that are reviewing it. I heard somebody's opinion recently, and I like it. Is don't let them know what the call is. Just say, hey, listen, we've got a controversial call. We've got a challenge. I want you to look at it and make a decision without knowing what that call is. There's a valid option, right? There all of a sudden you've taken the prejudice out of it. You've gotten a jury that doesn't know whether or not a crime has been committed.
Right, and they're just looking at the video to see, you say, is this guy safe or is he out? And you don't let them know what the call on the field was. The other idea that I've heard, and I know that it's probably more popular in other sports, but I think it's going to get popular in baseball because these calls are so bad. Why do you have to have a former umpire, a former official, as your replay official? In other words, there has to be people that you could put through a test of the rules that are going to be more capable of ruling on these video replays. You don't need it to be an actual umpire that's been in the field. The video speaks for itself, right?
You can make that argument, but what you can't have is you can't have Sideshow Bob up there calling games, right?
That's true.
That's the problem. I think that you've got to have some sort of schooling, some sort of experience in the sport in order to make that call, that valid judgment. Otherwise, you're taking a Simpsons character and putting him in the replay booth, right? Barney's sitting there with the beer tap, calling a baseball game, and I don't think you can have that. I think that you need to have somebody who's actually trained in this, who's probably done this, but something's got to be done. Otherwise, it just looks like they're protecting their brethren. And that's what can happen. And you at that point, you've lost absolute all credibility. And I'll make the argument with the buffoonery that's happened this year, you've lost credibility anyway.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, we'll just leave boxing as the sole sport where people who have no idea what they're talking about and have no experience in the sport are making all the decisions and judging all the fights. I'm going to switch gears a little bit.
To that point, Patrick, see college football playoff committee members.
There you go. There's another one, right? Where you've got a breadth of opinions, and that's really what counts. Is that we've got diversity of opinions and people who don't know what the hell they're talking about. And what I think is interesting about the college football thing, and I'm just going to throw this out very quickly because I do want to switch gears, but if you really wanted to have what you were calling this diversity of opinion, why do these people have to have any title whatsoever? In other words, you don't need a famous alumni who's been in politics, that's been in state or federal government, that's been in any other high-profile social position. If you're going to have the diversity of opinion, go out and get some college fans then. Have president of University
Right.
X, have athletic director of University Y, have the president of some major corporation, and then have you, Brian, and sit around a table, right?
Yes.
Why is your opinion any less valid than any of the other people that they've nominated in this so-called diversity movement?
Sid, listen, man, I can get in there and chat with anybody about anything with that from that aspect. You want me to convince you that East Tennessee needs to be in the FCS playoff championship? By all means, I'll do that all day long. It's if you really want to get somebody from that perspective, right? We took another tangent over into college football, but if you want to fix that, take the opinion out of it. Take the opinion of the opinions of folks that are associated with certain college programs. Have an NFL Pro Football Hall of Famers in there, right?
Right.
Get somebody that's completely away from college football, right? That actually knows what a football is, that may have thrown, caught, or received a football at some point in time, and put them in a room and let them watch games. I think that's where it's got to come from. It's not just a president of a university. It's not a distinguished alumni with a good resume. Somebody that actually knows football. These are not difficult things to figure out. I don't know why you and I have to get on this medium and have this discussion. It's not difficult. You've just got to make the right decision.
Well, I think the reason why we're having this conversation is because there's so much money in sports today that most of these decisions are as political as they are specific to the rules, the sport. It's gotten too big. So when you make these types of decisions, when you make these types of changes, they have social implications, they have political implications, they have economic implications. So the spectrum of what you have to consider, the stakeholders that you have to consider now, is much different. But I do want to switch something up, and I want to start with a question to you, and it's going to be based on the geography where you live. Let's say a week from now, you turn on the Google machine, you turn on the car, the radio's on, on the front page of the phone, the paper, your computer, first thing you hear in the car is Dan Snyder, member of cult that kills puppies in a sacrifice to the altar of greed. Are you in any way, shape, or form surprised by this?
No. To quote you, sir, no. Absolutely not. Without question, the answer is negative.
Right.
Negative, sir.
There's nothing that Dan Snyder can do in this day and age that you would go, oh, wow, that's terrible. I can't believe that he would stoop to that. I can't believe that the team he runs would stoop to that. There's absolutely nothing anymore, right?
There's nothing. And, what's even more interesting about the land I live in is obviously they are based in said land. Redskins Park is 7 minutes from my house, right? I've run into players at the local Topgolf and to coaches at the local Starbucks, and the rumors are abounding. I've heard stories from very, very credible sources, very, very close to my home, of very, very bad things that have been done year over year over year, and nothing surprises me. So no, being part of a cult that kills puppies, I would not be surprised of in one bit. It absolutely, unequivocally could happen.
So the reason why I prefaced this segment with that is, as you've read, no doubt, New York Metropolitan's bastion of sexual harassment, right? So out of everything that we know of the Mets over the course of the last close to 20 years, with Wilpon and company as owners, the cherry on top of that sundae of shit is, oh yeah, after they've done every other despicable thing as owners, they were also sexually harassing any female that came within 10 feet of the front office. And so the correlation is there, right? Nothing that you hear about Dan Snyder is going to surprise you. Nothing that we hear about the way the Wilpons managed that team, ran that team, owned that team is going to be surprising. And yet somehow it's like a cat shit in my mouth after running away, right? Like, I thought you were gone. I thought this was over. And somehow you came back into my life just to take a dump.
Correct. It's, every year they have hope. Fans have hope. You yourself have hope that the Metropolitans will actually become a bona fide baseball club. But inevitably, the Mets become the Mets. And in one way, shape, or form, something's going to happen. It's a disaster. It's a abhorrent culture. And again, one would think with new leadership, these things would change, but it just hasn't. The only thing that's changed is he's the only owner in baseball that didn't lose money last year. So now he has money to spend on players, that is, on players.
Well, I actually, this just dawned on me, and it is because you brought it up. There are people in the hemisphere of these teams, right? You live close to the facility, so you're going to see players, you're going to see coaches, it's going to be members of the media, all sorts of different types of people who work for the organization. And you get into anecdotal conversations with them, and none of this is secret. In fact, you could go as far to say it's an open secret. And it takes decades for a lot of this stuff to come out, right? There seems to be, I don't want to get on a tangent about the media, but I have a hard time believing that within the sports landscape that fans like you and I that follow these teams that may actually have, because of proximity or people that we know, information about these teams, how we can have knowledge of these types of open secrets, and yet they're not reported on for years.
Oh, right. Absolutely. And let me be clear. I've not seen nor heard of anything specifically with the Washington football team, with the players, so on and so forth. I've obviously heard rumors, and none of that surprises me. But you're right. It seems like these things go on for years, and nobody reports them. And I don't want to get into the bias of the media and this and that. It's not a political conversation, but so many things are swept under the rug. If there wasn't a cell phone presence at a club or at a club last year with Dwayne Haskins making it rain, would we have heard anything about it? Right. But as you pointed out over many, many podcasts, we now have cell phones. Everybody's got a camera. Nobody's going to see an alien. Otherwise, you would document it. And everybody's going to see you throw singles in the strip club.
Exactly.
That's the bottom line.
So from a journalistic standpoint, we are now all the journalists to some extent because we're documenting this stuff with our phones, right?
Correct.
I don't want to get on the bias of the media because I actually don't think this type of story in particular is about bias. I think this type of story is more about money and access. Yes. These journalists know that if they go and they report some of this stuff, they're certainly going to lose access. And in the landscape of sports, without access to coaches, players, and or ownership or the ownership's mouthpieces, general manager, people of that effect, they're not going to have any type of opportunity to make money. So it's access equals money. I'm not going to shit, where I work, and I happen to just cover, one of the most nefarious sports franchises, whether that be the New York Metropolitans, the Washington football team, and this stuff just goes unreported until it doesn't. And I think until it doesn't is the momentum of negativity around the teams. It's almost like bad performance on the field, the fights in the locker room, or the fights in the clubhouse, the reports of the backbiting coming from the front office. You know, you had the Mets GM actually making calls to Mickey Callaway, right, in another city, arguing about who should be put into a game or who should be pulled out. Once the momentum starts to get there, then the journalist, quote unquote, the journalist, feels, you know what, maybe I can leak some of the stuff about the fact that every swinging dick in that front office sexually harasses women.
Right. And you can see this with, it was Britt Caroli. I may mispronounce her name. Britt Caroli was the athletic beat reporter for the Nationals that got promoted up to a national MLB gig within the Athletic. And at that point in time, that's when she came out with the expose stating some of those same things, right? I'm sure you've read it, or if you haven't, I personally haven't read it. I prefer Cliff Notes and podcasts and for somebody to tell me what happened as opposed to actually putting the time in. But there were the articles where, the instances she stated that she walked into somebody's room for an interview and all of a sudden it was dimly lit and there were candles everywhere and they thought because she was being nice that she was hitting on them. Completely inappropriate. But I think to your point, that's the case. It's if I say anything while I'm here, while I'm actively reporting on it, I've lost access and I don't have a job anymore. It's a career killer at that point in time. Because if nobody's, and I'm not a journalist, you're not a journalist, but a journalist depends on sources. A journalist depends on word, right? Adam Schefter's not coming up with stuff in the middle of the air. He's actually had conversations with people. If he breaks that trust with folks, then he's not going to have those sources anymore. If someone in that type of situation actually brings up the fact that somebody may have done something inappropriate, they've just lost access and therefore may have lost their job. And none of that is right. None of that is a good thing. But how long can we just sweep it under the rug until we actually admit that Dan Snyder is a part of a cult that actually kills puppies?
Right. Or that the Wilpons, in their quest for power, were more than happy to allow people to completely undercut and undermine one another. In doing so, many of them exercised that as an opportunity to sexually harass many of the women that were part of the organization. Brian, I appreciate the time. I appreciate you coming on the show and discussing with me sports, a little politics, a little social issues.
Yep. Mr. Knackley, congratulations on episode number 10. Happy 10th episode to you. And I wish you the best of many more. And I'll look forward to catching up again soon.
Sounds good, buddy.
Act 2, who is the real conservative? And who is the real liberal?
For all intents and purposes, the political parties are exactly the same. They are exactly the same. They use identity politics to justify their actions for one political base or another, but in action, both political parties are exactly the same. Case in point, Ron DeSantis and this new law that was passed in the state of Florida specific to quote-unquote rioting. Let's get the backdrop of what really happened in order to understand why this new law was passed. Law enforcement officials, state agents, federal agents, state agencies, and federal agencies were well aware of the size, the magnitude, the gravity of the protests that were occurring in this country during the George Floyd situation and during this Stop the Steal situation in Washington, D.C. There was no ignorance whatsoever on behalf of local law enforcement agents, state law enforcement agents, federal law enforcement agents, all of the agencies surrounding law enforcement This was all well known. The report card for all of these principles is an F. Failure. They failed. It does not matter if you affiliate Democrat or Republican. It does not matter if you affiliate religious or secular. It does not matter if you affiliate conservative or liberal. In all of these protests, we see a failure on the part of the government. So let's think in practical terms about what it means that Ron DeSantis champions, takes credit for, passes this new law in the state of Florida based on nothing more than that failure. This is a clear expansion of the scope of government authority. Plain and simple. Dress it up however you'd like. It's an expansion of governmental authority. At the expense of who? At the expense of the rights of individual citizens. You need not have any additional laws in order to criminalize the conduct that occurred at many of these George Floyd protests and with the protest at the Capitol based on the election results. Let's examine this critically, not cynically. By way of the government's own failure, it then turned and expanded its own power and limited the power of the citizenry in order to address this in the future. The government has used failure as an excuse to broaden its own powers and to take away the rights from individual citizens. Again, it already had all the power that it needed to criminalize this protest conduct that turned into rioting. It already had the resources, and it failed utterly. So let's look at this from the prism of conservative versus liberal, Republican versus Democrat. Here you have a Republican governor taking the position that he maintains is for law and order, that he maintains will better protect the citizenry. How has he done that? By increasing the power of the state at the expense of the citizenry. By increasing the power of the government. Are you listening to the keywords here, dear listener? If I presented this to you generally, you would think that this expansion of governmental power at the expense of the little guy, of the citizen, without any detail, this is something that you would think would be decried by the conservatives, by the right-wing people, by the Fox News types, the left wing, the socialist, the communist, expanding the scope of government to take away the rights of the individual citizen. The cognitive dissonance here is appalling. The government, for all intents and purposes, is allowed to fail up, right? The government is allowed to increase its scope of power because it can't effectively manage the scope of its own powers. For all of us that had ever affiliated with conservatism, with the Republican Party, or with classical liberal principles at their foundation, this is absolutely absurd. The government can't properly manage the power and authority that it already has. We embrace as much as Republicans, as conservatives, as classical liberals. That's why we advocate for a small government. No account incompetent jackasses act like no account incompetent jackasses. News at 11. Therefore, give them as little power as possible. Give them as little authority as possible. Yet, if you dress it up well enough, here you have conservatives, Republicans, cheering on the government taking away individual liberties because the government can't manage its responsibilities. Give the government more authority because it's not good at exercising authority. That's absolutely fucking brilliant. Brilliant. That's like a parent giving their 16-year-old child a used car for their birthday when they get their driver's license, watching the child within a week of getting that car go out and total it and wreck it, and then saying, well, now I'll buy you a brand new Porsche. I don't give a rat's ass how you dress it up. It doesn't matter to me. As I've stated before, dear listener, I'm not rooting for any of these people. They are not my heroes. Too often when we watch the government fail, we turn around and give the government more power more authority when we know that initial failure had nothing to do with a lack of power and authority in the first place? If a crowd of 26,000 people comes out for any reason to do anything, you can't hold that crowd of 26,000 people responsible for the actions of a few of the members of the crowd. You know who did that, kids? The king. That's right, the king. And after having done so, we told the king to go f*** himself. And then we had a revolutionary war. Maybe you're down with it, dear listener, and I'm the one on the outside looking in. But I certainly don't need an expanded government. And I'm certainly not going to be bowing down and kissing the ring of any f***ing king. There really is no more left, and there really is no more right. In action, they are the exact same thing. And we have to be smarter as a people to not let them divide us, because the old adage is as true today as it was 500, 1,000, 4,000 years ago. Divide and conquer. There is an us versus them out there, and the us is the people and the them is the government. Which side are you on?
Act 3 Super League Nonsense.
As will be a recurring theme on this program, on this podcast, the media has failed. Failed in its duty. As I alluded to in an earlier podcast, it's sensationalism or human interest stories. There is no news, there is no analysis. For the uninformed, a number of major soccer clubs in England, in Germany, France, Spain, Italy, were invited to join what was called a Super League. Now, the story, as it has been presented in the media, is that these major international soccer clubs, which, by the way, for the uninformed, for the casual fan, are each and individually bigger than any North American sports property. Bigger than the New York Yankees, bigger than the Dallas Cowboys, bigger than the Los Angeles Lakers. These major international soccer clubs consist of the largest sports properties in sport. They collaborated in order to form what they called a Super League. These teams would compete against one another in a separate league that they were forming to obtain some bullshit Super League championship. A footnote to the story was that this idea was derived in North America, or at least had its advent in North America, in that it was being backed by JP Morgan Chase. Don't forget that part, dear listener. We're going to come back to it. This idea was being backed by one of the largest banks in the world. Now, what are some of the rationales for wanting to do something like this, to form this Super League? Well, of course, it's the money. It's the attention. It's the eyeballs. Even casual fans from around the world would be attracted to the tournament, would watch it on television. It might introduce new casual fans to some of these clubs, where they would thereby become more passionate fans, buying the merchandise, following the club on the internet, following the club on social media, and the like. Good money, good promotional opportunity. In addition, one of the other ideas that's been floated around in the media and by pundits is the fact that these major clubs are having to play in leagues with minor clubs. You may hearken back, dear listener, to the podcast that I did about Newcastle and how the dynamics of these leagues operates in these other countries. Quick recap, there is no monopoly in Spain, in Italy, in Germany, in France, in England. There is no salary cap in international football, in international soccer. So billion-dollar properties, billion-dollar soccer clubs are competing against soccer clubs from much smaller cities, from much smaller fan bases, with a hell of a lot less money. The easiest and most recognizable comparison in North America is a team from New York City playing the Green Bay Packers, right? Now, because the NFL is a monopoly, because the NFL has salary caps, a small market franchise can compete with a large market franchise. That is not the way it's done in Europe. I have heard from some of these pundits that there is discontent with these major international clubs that are worth billions and billions of dollars each, that they are tired of subsidizing smaller teams in their league. They're tired of having to compete with lower level competition. It's not really challenging A, the club, B, the players, and C, the viewer. How often do you want to see Big Brother go and beat down Little Brother? It's not compelling television. So what do we have as the popular culture justification, based on the media reporting, based on the information we're being fed, about why this league would come into being in the first place? Well, there's the additional money, sure. There's the additional promotional opportunities, the world exposure, the television exposure, sure. And then there's this discontent within these clubs. They're tired of having to carry the water, so to speak, for the rest of their league, for a bunch of teams that, frankly, they think that they're better than. You aren't going to hear the truth in a lot of places, dear listener, but you are certainly going to hear it on this podcast. Let me explain to you that all of that is bullshit. The key element to these stories that you've heard about this Super League lies in two lines. One, the entire endeavor was being backed by JP Morgan Chase, and two, every club that agreed to participate was going to get $425 million. Let me repeat. JP Morgan Chase, $425 million. Now let's really talk about this story. I started following the Premier League in the late 90s. Again, for the uninformed, the casual fan, this is the top league in England. The makeup of the league was completely different. Within 5 or 6 years, the Premier League started to attract, by way of money, marquee, world-renowned players. Many clubs within the Premier League started to outbid some of the biggest clubs in Spain, the biggest clubs in Italy, which, up into that point, were the largest spenders on international players. These English clubs started to compete and outcompete the Barcelonas of the world, the Juventuses of the world, for players. The late aughts was an arms race in international soccer. Again, there's no salary cap. So you have more and more clubs spending more and more money on a limited number of players. Naturally, the prices skyrocket. What a lot of fans don't have a good memory for, and what a lot of fans don't truly understand is, even though your club may be owned by a billionaire, even though your club may report massive revenues in television rights, in ticket sales, in paraphernalia sales, jerseys, these clubs are often operating with massive debt. I'm sure you've heard lines like this before, that every millionaire out there seems to owe $1 billion to a bank. But the most apropos turn of phrase speaks specifically to this situation. When you owe $1 million to the bank owns you. When you owe $100 million to the bank, you own the bank. It is wise, then, for many of these clubs to operate with very large debts. So what's the issue? The banks, the lenders, are only content when you're able to make your payments. You can owe a lot of money, but they want to see a lot of money generated by way of the product. Dear listener, what happened to the product over the course of the last 16 months? What did you see during this pandemic? First and foremost, you saw games being canceled. And then when the leagues actually were capable of coming back and playing, you saw contests with no fans. So no matter what you see in the Forbes magazine list or some other dumbass list about the richest, most lucrative franchises on planet Earth, 8 or 9 of those being international soccer clubs, international football clubs, they are operating on razor-thin margins given the amount of debt they've taken on to sign players. Then you cut off revenue for practically an entire year. Now, as bad as you may think that would hurt some of the smaller clubs, again, they have less obligation by way of player salaries. To give you an idea, some of the largest international soccer clubs have annual salaries for their players $500 million. In the professional sports in North America that have salary caps, most of the salary caps are between $100 million and $170 million. So each and every club can only spend $170 million, $150 million, whatever the respective sport is. And you have several international football clubs, international soccer clubs, spending $500 million a year on salaries. You take a year's worth of revenue away from them, and they're running so deep in the red that they're in financial trouble. Billionaires are billionaires for a reason. And one of the reasons is they don't run and throw in their own money without a guarantee that they're going to get it back. You don't throw in good money after bad. If you want to level the balance sheet on a profit and loss statement, you need a large cash influx. And the billionaire is going to say, where can I get that money absent me having to contribute it myself? Enter stage European Super League. You have a major U.S. bank, which is a major world bank, JP Morgan Chase, which is likely holding significant debt for some of these clubs, putting up close to $3 billion to start a Super League in order to generate massive amounts of revenue. Every one of those teams immediately changes the scales on their balance sheet. Their profits and losses look a hell of a lot better to their creditors the second they sign that contract and enter into this Super League competition. They're $425 million richer. And don't believe this nonsense for a second that they're the ones financially supporting these leagues. And without them, these leagues would go under. A European Super League is like a Transformers movie. It's loud and it's flashy. There are explosions. Look, big shiny things. Loud noises. But when the lure of all that subsides, what do you have? In the case of those Transformers movies, an absolute piece of shit. And that's what you'd have in that Super League. A phony competition ginned up by a bunch of corporate financiers to help rebalance a profit and loss statement. Without the regional and historical rivalries, that league is going to flame out. How many times are you going to watch Manchester United play Real Madrid when the competition means nothing? There's no real qualification in order to get there. It's for all intents and purposes one of these international friendlies that these clubs will come and play in countries like the United States, in Australia, again, just to try to promote the brand. Once that promotion wears off, once the newness wears off, what are you going to do then? There's only so many Super League type ideas that the sport could implement before the fans start to lose interest. And I don't want to stray too far from the point. These major clubs operate at a major deficit, and they need a major influx of cash, and they need it soon. That is the truth, and the truth is certainly not popular, and you're not going to find a lot of media pundits, a lot of media outlets who are willing to say as much, because that money is going to come straight into their pockets as well. The attention generated by something like a Super League is going to help their bottom line as well. I started this podcast as a fan, for fans who are going through the same, often cynical, debate within themselves about their sports fandom, their allegiances. This Super League is nothing more than affirmation that this self-assessment, this critical look inward, is warranted. This is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast.